Welcome to a Quaker Take on parenting. A Quaker Take is a podcast from Quakers in Britain exploring a Quaker perspective on the issues of the day.
Parenting seems like a slightly unusual topic, Jon.
Yeah, perhaps, but there's been a lot of chatter online about what it means to parent in a Quaker way, if the Quaker values and spiritual openness create good foundations for raising children.
I do remember reading an article about someone who wasn't a Quaker, but was blogging about trying Quaker parenting.
No, I've read that one. And that's one of the reasons why we wanted to explore this in a way that kind of only a podcast can. And in many ways, this episode is more than just about parenting. It's also about like how we relate to each other, personal faith journeys, and what it means to be in community. I mean, I'm not a parent, and probably not planning to be anytime soon, but I found the interviews in this episode really fascinating, actually.
Yeah, I'm not a parent either, and I also didn't grow up a Quaker, so I'm sort of curious about what's involved in all of that.
Yeah, me neither, yeah. So we've kind of approached this from a number of different angles, and in this episode we've got lots of different small interviews because we felt it was best to explore such a rich and subjective topic in this way. We start off with me talking to Maya and friend of the podcast Alistair about what it's like to be Quaker parents, and then I was also lucky enough to talk to someone called Martha, who isn't a Quaker but her partner is, so I asked her what it's like and how that relates to raising two children together.
Great. And I've been talking to two young adult Quakers about what it's like to have grown up in a Quaker community, so we'll hear from Jenny and Lewis later.
Yeah, and those interviews are lots of fun and really interesting. So if you're curious about Quakers, there's quite a lot to get from this podcast today. But equally, if you're someone who's listening who's embedded in the Quaker community, there's lots of rich stuff here for you too. So yeah, join us as we try to pull together what a Quaker take on parenting is. So I'm here with Alistair and Maya, and we're having a conversation about Quaker parenting. The question I have really is, do you think being a Quaker has affected how you've approached your parenting?
Yeah, I mean, I've been thinking about all of this in advance of this conversation and talking with my partner, and we were sort of having a discussion about how we never specifically think, oh, today I'm going to Quaker like a parent. I'm going to put that lens on my decisions and my choices. But I think being a Quaker and going to a Quaker meeting affects me, and therefore who I am and how I am in my life, and part of who I am as a parent. And so inevitably the choices and the decisions and the approaches I take are affected by Quakerism, because Quakerism affects all of me.
Yeah, so that's interesting. But that fits kind of with this idea of like the whole of life kind of thing.
Yes.
And you're not a Quaker on one day. So I could see how that would work. Is that the same for you, Alistair?
Yeah, I think it is. I think get that completely, that I don't kind of wake up and I think, right, now, as a Quaker, how do I need to do this bit? And I think that it is, I mean, I suppose for me, a really significant part of it as a Quaker and as a parent has been about being part of a spiritual community. And I suppose, yes, for me, that's something that infuses everything that I do, sort of all that I am. So it's not that there are bits that I do like this, bits that I do like that. And I guess there are also sort of two parts of it as well, that my daughter's 10 and a half, and she's just gone up into year 6. And part of me being a Quaker parent is about how I care for and hold and am with her. And part of it is about wanting to offer her something, kind of a lens through which to see life, or to share some of those values that are part of our life and our way of being as a Quaker community. So yes, part of that being a Quaker parent is about my relationship with her, and part of it is about wanting to support her in her kind of living in the world.
Yeah, and I think Quaker meetings offer a lot to that, both for me having space to discern and take forward sort of different thoughts and ways of moving forward with sort of parenting challenges that come up, but also having the community around me to question and to ask, I guess. I've been really lucky with being at Hampstead meeting that there's been a lot of parents that I've been able to discuss parenting with. And I think that's led me to make choices and decisions that I feel an inner integrity to, because I think parenting is really hard. There's so many decisions and choices you can make and so many different ways you can act, and there's never going to be one way that fits everyone. But to feel confident that the choices that I've made have been right for myself and my family and my son Robin gives me more confidence as a parent. The other side of that is that Robin is also growing up with this spiritual framework around him, and being able to explore the silence, the stillness, and being around other Quaker families on a Sunday. So when he was born, he was described quite frequently by others at the meeting as not a natural Quaker, more of an evangelist, because very, very noisy through most of the meeting for worships that he was in as a baby. But now he's sort of approaching 3, and he quite regularly says, I just need to think about that, or I need a bit of space. And so I do believe a lot of that comes from attending meeting all of his life, and also the way that we talk about things as a family, which probably comes from some of our experiences of being Quaker.
Yes, I think for me, what's felt really valuable about that being part of a spiritual community is that, and our experience has been quite different in that Emily, for most of her life, has been the only child in the meeting. But I think the way that the meeting have held that has been really, I think it's been very tender and very generous, and it's been full of respect, I think, and valuing of her and of what she brings to meeting. And for me, there's been something really helpful and quite freeing about her being able to be part of a community where there are other adults of all different ages as well. There's a whole kind of cross-section of people who are involved in that children's meeting and sort of supporting of her. You know, to be able to hear from them something about their stories, something about the values and choices that shape the way that they live. She's learned from them and sort of heard from them kind of stories of other Quakers and of Quaker tradition and of sort of Quaker history. And always, I think it's been exploring and questioning and sort of very open. And so her kind of growing as a Quaker has been something that she's very much done as part of that community, rather than been something that I've necessarily sort of shaped or even particularly kind of informed. And as a child, when you say about Robin not being a natural Quaker, I think as a child, Emily is very much a conformist, and she likes there to be rules, and she likes to know what's the right thing to do. And so lots of her learning as a Quaker has been about, we need to explore this. People might do this in different ways. Sometimes rules really do need to be challenged and broken, and you really need to kind of own and understand yourself. And I think that's been a really big bit of learning for her. And what the meeting has then also done, I suppose, by doing all of that with her, is that that's then given me the space to be still and to worship and to do my own kind of learning and growing as part of that community too.
Do you find that the silence of Quaker meeting for worship helps you kind of structure your thoughts a little bit around, like, if you're living quite a hectic life, you've got young people in your life, do you seek kind of guidance in kind of a way of going in there and thinking things through? Does that feel like it's something that's coming from you? Does that then happen into worship? Like, what's your relationship with that space? Has that changed?
I always come out of a meeting for worship slightly changed, slightly different, or within a different emotional state, or kind of with a different sort of thought. But I don't necessarily go in thinking I need to get an answer to a specific problem. And so sometimes that I do come out with different ways of approaching parenting. So Robin's approaching 3. He is dealing with really big emotions, and sometimes they come out as massive tantrums. And that's hard, because as a parent, you don't know, I haven't got the experience of responding to that before So thinking about how I can make those emotions easier to navigate for Robin, or how my response to those emotions impact him, is something that I have sort of thought about or changed my approach following being at a meeting for worship. So often I think the busyness of life can mean that you're just trying to get through the day, get to nursery on time, get to work on time, get home on time, eat on time. And so some of that listening to your child or kind of playing can get pushed out. And I think having the time to reflect together or separately in the meeting for worship does then change how we are as a family.
I mean, so I suppose I often go into that space, kind of into that stillness with all kinds of stuff, some parenty stuff, some life, some work. I don't think I ever go in thinking, I'm going to look for an answer to this particular thing. It's normally like I go in with this huge untidy bag of stuff, kind of empty it out in my head and think, goodness gracious, what to do with all of this. And for me, the stillness it's a discipline. I don't always find it easy, but it's the space in which both consciously and unconsciously some of that stuff gets distilled, see it more clearly, let some of it go. Some of it continues to kind of, worry at you, and it's not, kind of it's not a magic tablet. But yes, I suppose there's something in the discipline of the stillness that for me stops me doing that talky thing and talking it out and solving it, and just allows me to be still with it. And for part of meeting for worship, Emily will be out and doing other stuff. And then for the last part, Emily and any other children who are there will come in, and that can be a time for us to be still together. And I really cherish that too, just that moment where side by side and entirely as equals as well in that space, we worship together. We bring our whole selves into that space, into that stillness. And I think it's helped in terms of sort of me as a parent. I think it helps me to stand back from that tendency to want to deal with stuff. So a couple of years ago, Emily changed schools, and it was a really painful transition. And there weren't words that could make it easier, and there wasn't a thing to do that could solve it or take it away, but that there was a space in which it and we could be held. And I really treasured that at the time. I
think that's really true about how a meeting can hold you, because just sort of thinking about how my meetings held me and my husband and Robin over the past 3 years. So when Robin was born, they provided food for us for 2 weeks. They brought food round, and it just allowed us to slowly introduce Robin to people in the meeting, but also have sort of those chats of what are we doing? Are we doing it right?
Yeah.
Poor baby. But with those people that came round, we've continued those conversations over the last 3 years. We've got a kind of stronger connection to them in relation to our parenting. And so it sort of formed a small community that we felt we could access very easily to talk about parenting and challenges and things like that, as well as having the practical, nutritious foods really early on, which was amazing. And then at birthdays or key moments, as Robin starts to walk and then therefore starts to sleep less again and things like that, we were able to kind of check in with people from meeting. And they were constantly asking. And there's something amazing about sort of asking, how are you, in the 10 minutes before you go into meeting, sort of how deep you can get in your understanding of how someone really is. Yeah, we also had a miscarriage as a family, and the meeting held smaller meeting for worship for us as parents, which was incredibly helpful for the whole family, because it allowed emotions to be sorted and thought through and for that to be recognised. And so we were able to bring all of ourselves, all of our challenges of parenting or family life to the meeting in some way or another.
I wonder particularly with stuff like discipline, Quakers have like quite a big thing about like reconciliation, and a peaceful approach and a non-blame kind of approach. And I just wondered, does that translate into the way that you raise your children in that very practical sense?
I think this is one we're sort of exploring at the moment, really, with growing independence and ability to make choices himself. Robin is more willful than he was. You can't just pick him up and distract him into something different like I could when he was 1, maybe. But yeah, we talk a lot about choices. I don't know whether we've quite got it right yet, or if we ever will, but when he's not wanting to brush his teeth or something like that, we talk about a choice of time. If we can spend a long time here waiting until you're ready, or we can do them quickly and then go and play and do something really fun and exciting. And it would be quite easy to get really frustrated in that moment of, it's just something that has to be done, it's something we do every day, it's part of our routine. Give a bit of space for him to then be ready to participate rather than getting cross and angry. Yes. At least that's our intention.
Yeah, and I think that's absolutely right. I don't know if we get it right, and I don't imagine that we ever really will, certainly not all the time. I suppose for me, if there was a value or a particular Quaker lens that sort of shaped a lot of it, I suppose it's something about that absolute kind of respect. Yes, I think sort of respect for her dignity as a person. Mm-hmm. And for me, not to think, right, you're there to fit in with what I need you to do, but for us to be standing there as equals. And I think for me that feels a really, really valuable and vital thing.
So a question that I'm quite interested to hear is there some like really practical stuff that maybe somebody might want to, if they were listening to this, they might want to know about, like, you go to a meeting, your child's screaming, or is it difficult if you're pregnant to sit for an hour? Those kinds of questions. I don't know, is there anything you would have to say on those issues?
I think as a parent, you're more tuned in to the noises that your child makes and wary of those. So when Robin was a baby, he never slept through a meeting for worship. Never the right time. So he would just be gently chatting away and things, and there'd be sort of moments where my anxiety would be higher, thinking, oh, disturbing everyone else, maybe I should leave. But there's some really helpful ministry that allowed me to feel comfortable and to stay. Even breastfeeding a meeting for worship, I didn't always feel comfortable, but I did after a while, to feel this is a space. Still, it was quiet, and that space is there for everyone and all of us and who we are in that moment. So I think the more I went to meeting, the more confident I was to stay in for longer with a child who wasn't entirely silent, and that enabled me to stay connected to my spiritual journey rather than not going to meeting for 2 years until he was able to be in the children's meeting on his own. Yeah, and I think meetings have to be open to who comes and accepting of that. So it's not just the responsibility of parents or the children and young people's meeting to be welcoming to families and children and to create the space and to be aware of the dynamics that change when children are part of a community. It is the responsibility of everyone in the meeting, and luckily the meeting I have been at has done that wonderfully. I haven't been to another meeting to know whether it would be different, but my experience was that they, as a community, were very open and very accepting and very loving to us as parents and to Robin.
I mean, I think for me, so it wasn't my responsibility to keep her still or quiet. And I think that thing about it being not just the responsibility, but the joy of the whole meeting. I never had a sense that she was anything other than loved and cherished. And it wasn't about how do we accommodate this child and any noise that she might make, but how can we cherish and nourish her? I think also I would say to anybody taking a child to meeting is to be kind to yourself. Yeah, not to expect too much of either you or them if you're going, for that first time.
So I'm talking to Martha. Nice to meet you.
Hello,
So tell us a bit about yourself.
I'm Martha. I'm married to a Quaker and we have 2 young children. One is 5 and the other is 8 years old.
But you wouldn't call yourself a Quaker, would you not? Is that?
Yep, that's fair. I'm not a Quaker, no.
Okay. So I'm really interested to hear what you think about Quaker parenting, obviously as somebody who's quite close to it, but not, how does that work? If I was to ask you to describe it, do you have an idea of it in your head?
My husband has a much more relaxed way of parenting than I do. And I think that at times is quite challenging, but also means that our children probably have quite a nice upbringing, quite a good upbringing, in that they have one parent that perhaps is a little bit more strict and one parent that's a little bit more laid back. So I guess it probably evens itself out a little bit.
Okay. So do you think that that's a component of being a Quaker, would be being particularly laid back about some stuff?
I think so. I think he's quite laid back. He's also quite happy to let things play out. So if I have a concern about something with one of the children, he is more likely to turn around and say, well, I think we should give it some time, see what happens. I'm a little bit more, we need to kind of get something sorted or something put in place, or we need to make some changes. And I would be wanting to do that quite quickly. He would be much more, we'll see what happens. Let's give it, a week or 2 and we'll see if things change, if it's something to do with behaviour, and then we'll perhaps address it in a couple of weeks' time if things are still a problem. So things like that, he's much more relaxed about than I am. And also in terms of bringing the children up to be independent, I would say I'm more standing over them, assisting them with everything, and he is much more, well, let's put things out for them and let them do it themselves and let them find their own way. But I think it brings good balance in the house. I think they have one parent that they know is there kind of standing over them quite a lot, and they have one parent that's allowing them the freedom to explore on their own and to, I suppose, to make mistakes along the way. So I think 2 together is quite a good way of bringing up the children.
So you find that there's an element of it complementing each other. Is there also an element of, is that sometimes challenging as well at times?
They do complement each other. I do find it challenging, and I do have to bite my lip quite a lot. But I can see definitely that there are positives in being laid back and also in allowing the children to learn for themselves and make mistakes along the way. I've kind of, over the years, I've learnt that does benefit them, and so it is good sometimes to kind of stand back and let things happen. I think he might say that he has also learned that there are times where you do have to be perhaps quite assertive, and that you do have to action things, and particularly around education, we have quite a lot of discussions about the best way to go forward. If our children have any problems at school, I am the first to kind of ring up the school and get in and talk about what problems there are. And I suppose he would be a bit more, well, let's give it some time, I'm sure things will improve. And there have been times where we have had to be a bit more proactive, and I think he would say that that's probably been a good thing as well.
Well, I find that really interesting. I wonder, how much do you feel like, if you don't mind me asking, that's either something to do with just him as a person, or something that's more cultural, or something that's, do you think there's a faith element that underpins it?
I think in terms of his upbringing, I think it was more of a laid back upbringing. So I think that definitely has affected his parenting. I think that in terms of his being a Quaker impacting on his parenting, I think the element of perhaps being more open-minded to things and to the way people are, and particularly around children and friendships. I think I suppose if I'm, part of it is being the stay-at-home parent, part of it's being there all the time with the children, but there are some friendships that I've been a bit wary of and haven't kind of intervened with, but have kind of said to him at home, I am a little bit concerned about a particular friend or a particular person in the classroom. And he has been perhaps more kind of open-minded and said, let's just see what happens. These friendships probably aren't going to be forever. As they grow up and find their own personality, the friendships will probably change along the way. So I think that is to do with his being a Quaker, is perhaps being a little bit more open-minded to different people.
It's fascinating that what you're suggesting is that there's a kind of parallel there between, say, so the Quaker approach to worship, where you wait for, whatever the spirit will lead you in a certain direction, and that kind of possibly underpinning an approach, and also that belief that inequality that maybe makes him more likely to not be. Do you think that's translating then into him sort of giving people more of the benefit of the doubt than maybe?
Definitely, and I think with me, I think as a parent, my instinct is, oh gosh, protect them. And his instinct is a bit more like, well, let's allow things to happen. And then we will make a judgment, or we will decide what's best for the children after some time.
So there's also possibly a sense that everything will just fall into place.
Yeah, I think so, yeah.
What is it like being in a family where, one of the parents is Quaker? How do you balance that?
The girls, they both had kind of like naming ceremonies when they were little. I wouldn't have wanted them to have anything particular. I'm not Christian, I'm not of any religion, so I wouldn't have wanted them to be christened or anything. But my husband felt that he would like some kind of Quaker presence in a naming ceremony. So we've had that for both of our children. When we got married, we had a Quaker meeting the following day after our marriage. So it's kind of always been there as a part of married life together and bringing up the children. And now they occasionally attend a Quaker meeting. Our local Quaker meeting doesn't have any provision for children, so they go for the last kind of 15 minutes of a Quaker meeting, and they go occasionally depending on other things on at the weekend, or whether my husband wants to take them, which they really enjoy going to. At their age at the moment, I think they go more to see the people and for the tea and biscuits at the end. We don't have a lot of discussions about Quakerism at home. So when they go to meeting, they bring back from meeting that experience, but then we don't do much else other than that at home. I think if you said to them, are you religious? They would probably say no at the moment, but we're bringing them up with kind of an openness to religion so that they can choose which path they wish to take, if they wish to take a path as they get older. We're not particularly bringing them up as Quakers.
I mean, that makes sense to me in the sense that they've kind of then got a bit of both the parents and a bit of openness there. Yeah, I guess the only question that I would want to ask, what are your thoughts on Quakerism? I
find that the meeting house locally to us is really quite an easy place to go as a non-Quaker. Maybe that's because it's a small meeting and they know that I'm not a Quaker, and I find that quite easy to go. I don't feel that I need to be a Quaker to go there. And I find that the people there, if I see them out in the community, they will stop and have a chat with me and the girls on a kind of non-Quaker level, I suppose. I've also been at a larger meeting house where I felt quite on the kind of outskirts, being a non-Quaker. So it varies, I think. I don't feel in the 10 years of our marriage and bringing up children, I don't feel I want to convert to Quakerism. I mean, some parts of it I like, and I think that in terms of being open-minded and being quite relaxed in our parenting, I find that gives a good balance at home. Parts that I find quite difficult. And I'm quite keen that our children have a choice and that we don't raise them as Quakers, but that they know about Quaker meeting and they know a little bit about Quakers, and if they choose to go down that route, as they're getting older now, there's more available to them in terms of summer schools and things. If that's what they choose to do, then that's fine, and I would support them to do that. But I'm not going to take them to regular Quaker meetings and bring them up as Quaker.
Thank you for sharing that. It's been really nice to talk to you.
Okay, well, thanks very much, Jon.
I really appreciate Martha's honesty and all of our interviews for sharing what can be quite personal stuff about themselves and their family. What particularly struck me about Martha's comments was how you could sort of, obviously it was quite subjective, both her perspective and her partner's approach to parenting, but you could kind of, at least I could see some of the things that for me would be recognisable as Quaker, then being reflective in how she saw her partner approaching things. Patiently waiting for things to unfold is kind of quite similar to Quaker worship and things like that.
Yeah, it is interesting how people's faith or their values do influence the way that they raise their children, and also when that it isn't necessarily in the same line and it's not necessarily in opposition. I found it interesting to reflect on my own parents, one of whom was very definitely a person of faith and the other one definitely wasn't, and that having a bit of tension within it, especially growing up with two divorced parents as well, that faith became a bit of a challenge within that too. It was interesting listening to Martha kind of reflect on that difference, but then also talking to Lois as well, as we're about to hear, about how her parents divorcing had an impact on the way that she experienced Quakerism as well.
Yeah, and the impression that I've got from so many of these different interviews is also that it's much wider than just your immediate family. There's those different people you connect with in different communities, and actually having a range of perspectives is helpful, even if you're with it inside a certain community.
Yeah, like that extra set of grandparents.
Yes, that comment, yes, which is coming up. So I think the best thing we can just do is pass over to you and the kids. Don't tell them that we said that.
Let's not.
So I'm Lois and I'm a 23-year-old children's nurse from Bristol.
Could you describe your family situation for me? Yeah, and how growing up a Quaker was part of that, within that family structure.
I started coming to Quakers when I was 4, and that was with my mum. So I think my mum started going to Quaker meeting because she wanted to, I suppose, explore her spirituality and faith outside of kind of the confines of a very theist church. Yeah, so we started going to Quakers when I was 4. At the time, my parents were married, and my dad did come with us, and my dad did a lot of kind of Quaker camps and things with me and my brother, my older brother. My parents got divorced when I was 7, and my dad stopped coming to Quakers really at that point, and I used to just go with my mum. And then, but in the last maybe 5 years or so, my dad has started coming back to Quakers again, so he is now a regular attender at the same meeting, which is really nice. So I live with my mum and my stepdad, who doesn't come to Quakers, and my little sister, who's kind of exploring her own spirituality. I suppose she's 10 years younger than me, so she kind of does what 14-year-olds do and dips in and out of things, which is quite nice.
Would you say she's quite comfortable doing that within the Quaker setting then?
Absolutely, and I think that it made more comfortable because she's just, when she comes back to Quaker meeting, she's just welcomed with open arms, and people, they don't ask her where she's been, and they just say, oh, it's really nice to see you. And we talk a lot about faith and spirituality and peace at home, so it's something that that we talk about regularly anyway. So coming back into Quakers is, I think it's just, I think she enjoys it. I mean, I can't speak for her, but I was probably the same when I was that kind of age, and it's something that in our Quaker meeting we do see quite a lot, like 13, 14, 15-year-olds who kind of just come when they want to, and they're not forced, and don't have to take part in anything that they don't want to, and I think that's nice.
Yeah, that does sound nice. I mean, to me, because I didn't grow up a Quaker, but I did grow up in a faith community, and my mum still is in that. And whenever I go back, and any of her friends who are part of that same group are kind of around, it is that there is a little bit of them kind of like why are you not coming, and it feels quite, it gets a bit judgy sometimes, and then usually I say something like, oh, I work for the Quakers now, and they're like, that's very liberal. Yeah, I think I probably would have appreciated being able to dip in and out of faith as a teenager, for sure. How did you feel like, obviously you kind of said you basically from the age of 4 you grew up a Quaker, and your mum was exploring that and your dad was going too. How do you feel like that their exploration of Quakerism as you were growing up influenced their parenting? Do you think the parenting as a Quaker or being influenced by sort of Quaker values in any way shapes parenting generally?
Yeah, I do think that it does shape the way that people parent. I'm not a parent myself, so it's hard for me to answer, but I think that it has, my parents exploring Quakerism helped them to be able to talk about things with me and my brother, so in obviously an age appropriate way, but such as war and politics and disaster and things, and to help us to understand that and to understand injustice and explore our own kind of social issues, I suppose, and help them to guide us, especially in teenage years. And I think that for them, or for my mum especially, she, I think, probably sought guidance from the Quaker meeting as well, because it's not easy to bring up kids and it's not easy to bring up teenagers. So I think that having a community is really useful because you can turn to them if you're a bit stuck, which everyone does get stuck.
Yeah. Did your mum find it particularly helpful then as your parents were getting divorced?
Yes, I think that she probably did find it very useful, but I was a child, so I didn't have that kind of insight into it at that age, I suppose. But I definitely, as a child, found it useful being able to go to Quakers, there being people there that did work with us as children, and you know, it was a difficult time, but having that community around you is just great, really.
And you mentioned that your dad stopped going around the time your parents were getting divorced, and now he's kind of going back. Is he going back to the same meeting, or is it to a different?
So now my dad is a regular attender, and me and my mum are members of the same meeting. So I think that he stopped going to meeting because there was at the time quite a lot of animosity between my parents, and it was easier for him to not be there. And but in the past few years it's been much more civil, and they just kind of get on, so it's fine for us to all be in the same meeting. Yeah. I mean, we have Christmas dinner together, so
oh, nice.
Yeah.
People often think of Quakers as sort of being able to deal with like all kinds of conflict, but actually it can be a real struggle if people who are part of the same meeting, whether you are an attender or a member, who are splitting up, and then actually that is difficult regardless of how easy that breakup is.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
But it sounds like you've kind of come through it now.
Yeah, definitely.
When you and your mum started going to meeting with your half-sister, was there ever any difficulty in taking her along at all with your stepdad?
No, there's never been any difficulty. And I mean, he'll occasionally come, and when my sister was younger and we used to, for example, do the weekends away with our Quaker meeting, he did used to come to that and enjoy it, but he's just never been that kind of interested in having any kind of faith, I suppose. But there was no struggle with my sister, and yeah, there's never been any kind of conflict there.
As you were growing up and then going to university and making a decision about those kinds of things, how did you feel like your Quaker community supported you with that?
When I was doing my A-levels, so when I was 17, 18, I had quite a lot of issues with anxiety and depression. And I think that going to meeting on a Sunday was, at the time, extremely helpful. I had quite a lot of anxiety around going to uni. I really wanted to go, but I wanted to be away from home, but I was kind of torn between, I don't know, is this the right thing? And I think going to meeting, there was a few key people there who knew about everything and were people that I could talk to outside of my family, I suppose, about the kind of struggles that I was having about the idea of going to uni. And then when I went to uni in Nottingham, which is a good 2-3 hours away from Bristol, and my Quaker meeting got in contact with the clerk at Nottingham Quakers, who just sent me an email and invited me to go to Quaker meeting if I wanted to, and I did, and they were extremely welcoming there. And then I still came to my regular Quakers when I was back.
Did you feel growing up that you could participate fully? Yeah, whether that was something that was part of, with you had no responsibilities as you were growing up sort of for the life of the meeting, but also now that you have sort of grown up a bit more and kind of you're an adult now and you're a full member and all sorts of things, or whether that has changed your relationship with the meeting.
Since I've been a teenager, I suppose, I've always felt and this was probably the same when I was a child, but I just can't really remember, but I've always felt very included in decisions, not massive decisions, but even about what we used to do when I was in the children's group, and being able to plan things, and when we went away to camps or weekends, being able to have some kind of say in what we wanted to do. And then as I kind of grew up a bit, I started being asked to take on a bit more responsibility in working with the younger children. I always love working with children, and I think that they know that, so therefore I've been included. And since I've been a member, I suppose there's been a bit more of a kind of steering towards not being formally included, but having roles. So I am part of the children and young people's group, but also decisions about the meeting house and how meeting runs.
Yeah, well, it's been really lovely chatting to you. Thank you for letting us ask nosy questions. Well, letting me ask nosy questions, let's be honest.
I'm here with Jenny McCarthy, and Jenny, you grew up a Quaker.
Yeah, both my parents are Quakers. I grew up going to Quaker meeting in New Earswick, near York, and yeah, I have two sisters, both younger than me, and we actually grew up with about 3 or 4 other Quaker families who were about the same age in our meeting, which was really nice. It was like having a lot of siblings. Most of them were less annoying than my ones, but
that's always the case for everyone. Yeah. So what was it like kind of being in that environment?
It was like having a family that's a lot bigger than your own family, actually. Yeah, we were definitely the children of the meeting. It was like having loads and loads of aunties and uncles and grandparents, which was lovely. Yeah. And we were very very close as a meeting. I think we were really a very strong meeting as a community. We used to go on trips together and do lots of activities. We did things like getting to know you sessions for all the old people in the meeting, which was lovely because people had amazing stories and experiences through their lives.
So was it a meeting your parents had been at for a long time as well?
They actually started going to that meeting when they moved to York, which was when I was 6 months old, and they chose New Earswick. It wasn't the closest meeting by any means, but because there were already children there, and at the time it was the only meeting in York that had any children, and it just happened that all the people who moved to York at the same time with the same age of children, or who had kids growing up in York at the time, they all just went to New Earswick. Really lucky for us and really nice. I think it's, I feel very privileged to have grown up in that environment.
And how do you think your parents' Quaker values informed the way that you were brought up?
I think that's quite a difficult thing to say, because Quaker values are something that, if you are a Quaker, they inform everything you do. in life. And I find that Quaker values really inform a lot of what people do anyway, even if you're not a Quaker.
Yeah.
You know, many people in the world act with honesty and integrity and try to lead a simple lifestyle these days, or just try to act with love in everything they do, and that's at the heart of it, really, isn't it? I don't think you need to be a Quaker to act like that. But I think what we learned growing up as Quaker children was that expression of values stems from our experience in Quaker meeting for worship. We went to meeting every week. We didn't go for the whole hour as kids. We went for about 10 minutes of it when we were little enough.
Yeah, an hour of silence gets a little bit.
Yeah. But that's been a constant throughout my life, and it's something that if you start doing it so young, it's hard to say if you learn how to do it or if it's part of you for whenever, from the moment you come out of the womb, really, pretty much, I guess.
Yeah. I guess lots of children, particularly like from a fairly young age, find it really difficult to be sort of quiet and still.
Yeah.
And kind of with that silence.
Yeah.
And even actually as adults, the sort of distraction and the busyness of everyday life and the constant note of social media and things like that.
Yeah.
Do you feel like it helped like equip you in some ways to deal with that?
Yeah, definitely. And actually, one thing our meeting was really good at is all age worship. So a few times a year we'd have an hour of worship where the kids were in there with the adults for the hour, and the adults would design an activity to keep everyone engaged, and this was something that both the children and the adults would be invited to do. And it could be drawing a big picture on the floor, or doing another kind of craft project, or thinking about a particular type of topic and writing some words down, or maybe some singing. And that really helped to sort of bring us all together as a meeting, but also to give us something to hold on to in the silence. And I still love that kind of worship where you have a focus like that, but I think it also gave me the ability, as I was gradually growing up with that, to sit in silence for longer and longer. And of course, meeting for worship on a Sunday wasn't the only Quaker experience I was having. I was going to Yorkshire Friends Holiday School in the summers when I was growing up, from the age of about 13, and that was also longer periods of worship. So it was just something that you sort of became constant.
What were the ways in which the sort of parenting and the Quaker community around you helped you deepen your understanding of your own spirituality, of your own faith?
I think hearing how people's Quaker faith and spirituality had informed them was a real inspiration. Yeah, there were a lot of stories and different experiences that people had that we'd hear about and that had stemmed directly from their Quaker faith, like conscientious objection. I think being part of a nuclear family but also a wider family gave a lot of insight into the right way to treat people.
Okay.
I mean, we were given a lot of tools to just take into interactions with other people, and a lot of resources that we could use inwardly to help ourselves. If you feel upset or sad as a kid, it's very helpful to be able to stop and be silent for a while and see what the inner light is saying, or how it feels inside you. Yeah, I think that was what it gave me, really.
Okay.
Yeah.
You mentioned previously that there's quite a rich history of Quakerism in your family. It kind of goes back a few generations.
Yeah.
Did you ever want to rebel against that in any way?
I think I wanted to rebel generally as a teenager, like every teenager does. I think I didn't have such a strong urge to rebel against the Quakerism in my family, particularly. I think because it's really hard to do that.
What do you mean?
Quakerism is very accepting of many kinds of difference. It's not a perfect religious community by any means, but the fact that our spirituality is based on listening and on waiting and on accepting someone else's truth may be different from yours. Yeah, that means that my Quaker community was not something I felt the need or the urge to kick out against. I did become interested in Wicca when I was a teenager, the sort of modern witchcraft movement.
Yeah, okay.
Which I think is possibly the mildest form of rebellion, spiritual rebellion I could have done. Where I just sort of got together with my friends and did some nature worship with candles, pretty much. When I was younger, actually, I used to wish I was Catholic.
Okay.
Because I was really beguiled by the thought of candles and incense and like priests in robes and like all the singing and everything, and the saints and the stories that are attached to it, all the magic that you get with very, very ritualized religion that you don't have at all in Quakerism. I think I wanted a bit more to hold on to. There is still somewhat a tradition in Quakerism of being a little bit Puritan. I think, some Quaker meetings meet on Christmas Day, and actually our meeting does that, and we have a Christmas party every year when we sing carols, and it's lovely. But a lot of Quaker meetings don't particularly do Christmas or, the sort of more ritual celebrations of the Christian year. Yeah, and I think I wanted a bit more of that. But I wanted to go really, really far the other way, And I probably would have hated growing up Catholic.
Who knows?
Well, yeah, not least because growing up queer would have been a bit more difficult, probably. Whereas in Quakerism, it's a lot easier, no one really cares, no one really minds, it's very open.
Was it a fairly easy process then of coming out?
It was barely a process at all. Yeah. I'm not sure if I've even officially done it yet. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it sort of barely happened. It sort of was just something I came to accept as I grew up, and I think I mentioned it to my parents at some point, but I'm not sure.
But it was never something you worried about telling family or Quakers generally?
No, never. No.
Yeah. It's always refreshing to hear that, personally.
Yeah.
In 2009, Quakers made the decision to support same-sex marriage, and obviously that conversation had been going on for a really long time. Do you think that also informed how you felt kind of growing up in that community?
That must have been happening quietly. A couple in my Quaker meeting where I grew up were the first couple to get married in York after that passed. When did that happen?
Legally in England and Wales it was 2013.
Okay, yeah. And they'd been part of the meeting for at least a decade by then. I don't remember growing up with the idea that it was something that needed to be talked about. And I think if I'd been, say, 20 years older than I am, obviously it would have needed to be talked about. I would have been wanting to get married and might not have been able to. Yeah. I would have been a lot more politically aware of that. But because it was something that was so sort of very quietly accepted, I didn't really grow up with a sense that it was an issue until it became like openly talked about like that in national Quakerism. And then I was, really grateful for that. Because I was becoming an adult and beginning to think about the implications for me as an adult. Yeah. It's something that I feel pleased that Quakers have done.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay.
Like a lot of things. But, then again, we're not a perfect community, and I don't want to go around giving the impression to people that we are a perfect community.
I think one of the things that Quakers are really well known for is being part of sort of political and social change in the world and really getting involved in lots of activism and that kind of thing. Was that part of your childhood at all?
Yeah, it was. I think in a quiet way. My dad is a very strong believer in the power of activism and acts on it. And my mum does too, but a bit more quietly. I think that's something that I really appreciate about Quakerism, is that you can express your beliefs in a range of different ways, even if you're not outwardly an activist who goes marching down the street every weekend. Yeah. But my dad was very involved in the peace movement from when he was a young adult, and stuff like the anti-apartheid movement, because that was going on when he was becoming a Quaker. And in the meeting too, we went on, a lot of people from the meeting went on the March Against the Iraq War, and we just sort of did things like writing letters. It was all pretty, not getting chained to the railings of Downing Street, but we just grew up with an impression that it's something you do because you should and you have to, and it's fun as well.
Yeah, I was going to ask, did you enjoy being taken to protests, or did you find that annoying?
Yeah, I think I did enjoy it. York is not a gigantic city. It's not like being in the middle of a gigantic crowd in London. It's not that big and scary, but it did feel important, definitely.
You're still quite involved with Quakers. Is that the same for your siblings?
I have 2 sisters, both younger than me. The middle one sometimes goes to meeting, but she's not really involved in Quakers. My youngest sister, Ellie, she is involved, and she's really interested in youth work. I think it's quite a big part of her life, which is really nice. And it's a pretty similar pattern in my mum's family, actually. She grew up with 4 siblings, and some of them have gone on to lead very, very Quakerly lives. Some of them go to meeting occasionally or most of the time, and some of them don't go to meeting at all.
I really enjoyed talking to Lois and Jenny about their experiences of growing up Quaker. I found it quite interesting how some of the things that they were saying was reflected in some of the things the parents have been saying earlier about finding space within Quakerism, whether from their parents or the wider Quaker community, about being able to be themselves and explore that for who they were. And I found that quite a powerful message.
Yeah, I've been sort of trying to think about whether we can pull some common threads together on what a Quaker take on parenting is. And it's something that I also asked the Quaker Parenting Facebook group. So firstly, there's definitely something about equality, which I've heard expressed in terms of like meeting the needs of both parties. So there's something there about respecting and enabling your children to be themselves, but there's also something about how that relationship manifests itself practically, like trying to think about everybody's needs, and that also is reflected in the community and how hopefully young people are treated in Quaker communities, but also about being able to ask for help from that community, and how, like we heard from Maya, the meeting supporting her. So for me, there was something around that.
Yeah, and I really think like that thing about enabling people to be themselves and to explore for themselves who they are was quite an important thing, whether or not that was through sort of generally how you express yourself, but also in the spiritual exploration element as well.
Yeah, and have giving young people a space to explore spiritually what their faith is and where they sit in a Quaker spectrum, or if they don't at all, and that's kind of being a really open process. But also the space for spiritual exploration of the parents going through such an important shift in life, and hopefully enabled to do that as part of a wider community, which was something that kept coming up as well. So I think another thing is about being part of an intergenerational community, particularly for people who, are moving around the country more and more and finding themselves perhaps distant from their immediate family, that you can sort of find connection, which I know some people expressed in a slightly jokey way about having like some extra grandparents in the meeting or whatever else, having people who are going through things at different life phases, which also came up a lot with what Lois was talking about.
Yeah.
How she relates to the meeting now.
Yeah, and how gradually she was able to sort of grow up and grow into responsibility through that time as well. That it wasn't just she's forever a child in the eyes of the meeting, but that actually as she got older she was able to engage at different levels, and they were able to provide that space.
Yeah, totally. And then Quakers often talk about values, Quaker values, in terms of like, say, peace and equality and simplicity and sustainability and truth. And those often manifest themselves in the way Quakers approach life, which can be different for different individuals, but sometimes can manifest themselves in slightly countercultural ways. So there was something definitely about having this conviction to go against certain trends, and then having a community that can support that. So particularly, I've heard young Quakers talking about that in the context visits to like military bases or wearing poppies and things like that. So there was something I think there that comes across.
Yeah.
And then there is the physical space as well, and that act of Quaker worship, which is mainly grounded in silence, which, for example, Alistair talked about, and Maya, and having that space to reflect and to take a step back away from it, which was actually valued by the parents, but also came across in the children, as Martha was saying, you know, her 2 young ones quite enjoy going to meeting for worship for just like 10 minutes occasionally. Like that was something that they were given the choice to go to, which I guess goes back to that first point, but that they were choosing to do it. So yeah, and then I guess for me that there's another key thing which is around non-violence, which I guess manifests itself really basically in like generally wouldn't expect Quaker parents to hit their children, as Quakers have a commitment to kind of peace, and which usually, you know, is pacifism and things, but also like, you know, peace beginning at home and deeper understandings of that and how you relate to that. And that nobody's going to get any of this perfect, but there certainly seems to be a sense of trying to build a household that is, you know, it's going to be chaotic and there's going to be rule breaking and some fallings out, but always trying to look for a solution.
Yeah, although I have some slightly hilarious stories from some Quaker friends of mine who grew up in a house full of mediators, and so they have all these stories about their parents mediating them throughout their teenage years and getting really frustrated because they couldn't just be angry at their parents.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, it's always an evolving thing as well, and I don't think any of these are necessarily like, you know, only Quaker things.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, that's I can see that as well. Yeah.
People will find ways to rebel.
But dear listener, what do you think? As ever, we're interested in your take. This is such a rich podcast with lots of different experiences. So, you know, let us know what your take on it is.
Yeah, so you can share your take with us on social media. You can find us at British Quakers. You can send us an email. You can find the list of all the show notes and things and any sort of like additional things that we wanted to add in at quaker.org.uk/podcast.
And if you look on our website, there's a section called Find a Meeting. It was quaker.org.uk/meeting, which has details about when Quaker meetings meet and if they have children's groups and things like that.
Thanks for listening to this episode of A Quaker Take.
Yep, thank you. Go well, friends.